On today's Queued Up, we have someone who's mastered both the heart and the system, Alicia de Lorenzo. Alicia started in public schools, seeing burnout, seeing what works, what fails, and what gets hidden. She's also a licensed therapist. She's walked between the edges of what people feel and what systems demand. And now she's a keynote speaker, high performance coach, and engagement strategist, helping organizations unlock what she calls aliveness, discovering the positive disruptions already inside them. We talk about how she reframes problem solving. Instead of digging deeper on what's wrong, she asks what's working and how do we scale that? We explore her journey from counselor educator to disruptor. This is Queued Up.
This is Queued Up, where we amplify the voices of educators with the science, soul, and story shaping education.
Can you tell us about yourself and how you got into the field that you're in?
Yeah, sure. I have been an educator for almost 20 years in my traditional role. I started out as a teacher, and then I became a student assistance counselor, which is in New Jersey, a unique position that addresses any students who might be suspected of being under the influence, but then also proactively supporting every student, but not through the traditional school counselor role. And then in 2017, I wrote a job description that didn't exist yet for the social emotional learning coordinator.
Okay.
And I coordinated all of our social emotional learning across our district. It was the first one in the state of New Jersey. And that was really to address our rising rates of absenteeism and chronic tardies and violence and disciplinary infractions that were through the roof. And we did that through lots of different means, but ultimately helping kids in their decision making and their regulation, helping them understand what was going on in their bodies. And then I stepped out in my traditional role and started working with schools all over New Jersey and throughout the country with the success that we had there.
So the word that was coming to my mind as you were saying all that, innovator.
No,
because you wrote a job description that didn't exist and said, okay, we have a problem. Here's a solution. Here's how we could do it. So which of those roles do you think prepared you the most for what you're doing right now?
I think they all did. I got to see from the perspective of being a teacher, the challenges. Then, as I'm a licensed therapist outside of school, so in that counselor role, I will always be able to apply the system of education is set up for that. Also, there's where the gaps are for students around their mental health. And then being district-wide, I wasn't just working, with one age group. I was pre-K through 12. And wow. What we realized really quickly was even though that position was created to support our students, that our adults were also suffering. And so that became like a joint effort to address the well-being of adults and children. And that was really powerful. So they all set me up for that. But the success of being the social emotional learning coordinator really created a pathway that didn't exist that I was able to share in schools all over the state and throughout the country. So
That's awesome. Did they just leave it at one person? Because surely one person couldn't do that role.
they did leave it at one person. Yeah. and
You must have done it well.
It was the position I wanted. It was a dream. So I was happy to be the one person. And then, really leaned on my colleagues who I knew were doing incredible things. I talked about this idea of positive disruption. It's like these people who I knew had found solutions. I didn't do it alone. I reached out to them to say, how are you doing this? How are you getting success with students, our toughest students? And we were able to scale a lot of what they were doing to the wider district.
So that takes me back to what you were saying earlier when you were talking about going in and finding what's working and then using that as a model. Can you kind of explain that? I was intrigued by that concept. I was like, oh, why didn't I think of that? That's great.
This idea of positive disruption is that in every single community, there are people who have figured out the answers to some of the most seemingly intractable problems. And they don't have any more resources. They don't have any more access, but they're doing things just a little bit uniquely different and getting better results. And so I knew my colleagues who had really great relationships with students that were difficult and had experienced a lot of trauma. And so I would ask and watch what they did. And it just kind of kept track of those practices and behaviors that were happening from one classroom to the next. And that went across a couple of themes. And so within those themes, we started to share those practices and allow those people who were experts in these things that were working to share them with their colleagues so that they really became the go-to people and were able to share that wisdom instead of keeping it stifled.
And you know what was really cool when you were doing your guest speaking, you kept using the word amplify. And I don't know if you've noticed our t-shirts or not, but it's literally to amplify the voice of educators. And as you would say that, I would think that's exactly what you're talking about. Like when you met your colleagues and you knew the ones that were doing things well and you amplified what they were doing in other places. Like, that is the key. I love that concept. Is that concept something, did you read about that somewhere? Is that just what you developed? I mean, how did that work?
I think it was around 2010, maybe just a little bit earlier than that. I was invited in my district to be a part of a group of educators that were going to be trained in a idea called positive deviance. Now, I don't use the word positive deviance because it comes with a lot of negative connotations. So
I'm not quite sure what that would mean.
Yeah, it's a really interesting oxymoron. It's, they're deviant by the sense that they are disrupting the status quo, and that positive deviance behavior is actually where the solutions are.
Yeah.
It rubs people the wrong way, so I've replaced it with disruption.
I agree.
So
I like that.
yeah, it's a more welcoming word. But I was trained in this model of positive disruption and positive deviance, and this is an approach that has had success globally across the globe for 30 years, solving, MRSA, solving malnourishment. The core of it is that in every community, there's wisdom that already exists. And we often try to, especially in education, we bring in outside experts, we bring in outside programs, and we forget that the experts are really in the room.
Right. They're living it out.
They're living it out. They know exactly what works. But because of the culture of education, which is just unique, we wouldn't think that it exists like this. Those innovators, they feel vulnerable because they have a target on their back. When you're trying to disrupt a system, people are like, listen,
Don't
making me look bad. Yeah, don't
we have a good thing going here. Yeah.
100%. And I was one of those disruptors. And I remember colleagues saying to me, like, why are we doing this? Why are you trying to change? I was trying to address mental health and trauma and high stress. Like, leave it out there. It's not for school. And we see now the impact that it has on education and learning.
Absolutely. And the amount of mental health focus that I feel like we need and then where we're at, they're vastly different. And with me working with educators and hiring educators, it's the educators that I'm so worried about. Like, a day after day, they're going home and they're exhausted. And I'm like, throw us a bone here. We need something.
Yeah.
So do you think that those roles that you had are what kind of guided you down towards that social emotional pathway that you're on? And
I think that's always just something that's been a part of me. I'm a connector by nature. I really love people. I feel energized by full rooms of people and the connections I can make afterwards. And it's really just been the heart of my work, even as a teacher. I felt like it was a vehicle to get to this place with kids where they were able to open up. Like, many times after practice, I was also a coach. Kids would come to my office and they would just share about the challenges that I don't know if anybody else was listening, or a few people I know that would, but it was a place for them to be able to kind of take off all of the masks that were in the way of their education. And for one person in your life to be able to do that, I know I've had those people in my life. And so it's just been by nature the way I do things. It's just in my, like,
who you are.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, and I had wrote down a few things I wanted to really touch on, and this kind of goes right into the next thing is, what's your core vision for being a disruptor in the status quo? What do you see as what you have to do, you personally?
I take this work that I do very seriously because I think that anytime you have a voice and you have something to share that can really change the lived experiences for people, that it's our obligation to do that. And so I feel committed to the stages that I get to speak on and the audiences that I get to impact, and how I can impact them beyond the stage, supporting, in any way that I can. My vision is to share widely the ways that I see the problems in education, name them, but also offer solutions. Like, I think we're remiss if we don't acknowledge that the system is broken. And we're asking people to thrive in a really broken system. And sometimes people forget the agency that they have in that. Everything feels so chaotic around them and uncertain. And there is some agency that people have. Alice Walker says our greatest challenge is that, we feel like we don't have the power that we do have. I kind of messed that quote up, but having educators recognize the power that they do have when they organize and when they, are disruptive in positive ways, how they can shift the experience not only for them and their colleagues, but for their students and then the community. So I'm really centered on a collective efficacy model that starts from within. What we need to do to change ourselves and disrupt ourselves that we are not serving us, so that we can be and then offer some collective efficacy.
You mentioned being a disruptor and working on changing the status quo, but what do you do when you are heading in to be that disruptor. Like you said, people don't always want the disruptor. I would love to figure out what's the MO. How do you go in and get the buy-in so that the people you're speaking to and the people you're working with can make that change? Because ultimately it's going to be them that's making the change. So what tips and strategies do you have? I'd love to know.
Yeah. So as far as, being a disruptor, it is who I am. When you meet me and you connect with me, you probably get that vibe very quickly. So people who are inviting me in, they kind of know what they are asking for, and there's a part of them that they want that message and they want that edginess to be upfront and set there to say, we're willing to like have this message and take these risks and we want you to. As far as what tips to go in with, I show up authentic to who I am. I mean, a lot of times schools have asked me, we've brought nurtured heart and we've done responsive classroom and we've done restorative practices. None of those work. So can you come and help us? And I'll say, no, I don't have a magic wand.
Right.
Those are really great programs or approaches because they're not all programs. If they haven't worked for you, you haven't done them well enough. There's not been a follow through or there hasn't been accountability. You need to go back. You don't need me. And so I'm very honest and upfront with people about what I do offer and what I don't. I don't have a magic wand, but in terms of how I disrupt and how I get people to buy in, is it's community driven. I believe in the people that are in the room, that they have the answers. And I share that with them up front. And then we go on a journey together to discover. And when people discover the solutions themselves, they're more likely to own them.
Yeah.
Say, we did it. I don't go into any school and say, I have all the solutions, I have the answers. Educators don't work that way. They are educated people. They know how to do this. But oftentimes they're not listened.
Right. And we get into that cookie cutter mindset of we all have to do it the same way. And so there's something on your website, I think it was a quote about giving people the agency to be creative.
That's right.
And I don't remember exactly how it was, but when I read it, it resonated with me because when we get pigeonholed into something, we lose our ability to be a problem solver, to be creative, to do all of that. We're just doing the rote
Marketing off, checking the boxes.
I need to get out through all of these things and missing sometimes that piece that's just right there in front of you. It's like the solution's right there, but nobody can see it because we're all focused in on the goal.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the quote that you're referencing is that we think that people need to feel alive to do creative work.
Is that what it was?
I love to really be given the agency and the autonomy to do the creative work that brings them alive. So, when we think about what brings people alive, it's being able to share their wisdom. It's being able to collaborate. And our schools are oftentimes not set up for people to do that well. But when you give people the opportunity and the agency to bring their wisdom and innovative thinking forward, then they come alive. And
yes,
that's a shift of how we do things.
And that was one of my questions is what is aliveness and why do we need it?
Oh, man, I could talk on this for hours.
Well, let's hear it.
Aliveness is that sense of feeling fully engaged and vibrancy and presence. And I think if I look around in all the spaces that I get to be in, whether it's in the education spaces or the mental health spaces, I think it's the thing that people are struggling with and don't have the words for the most, that we feel this disconnection from ourselves and others. We feel this disengagement with our work and even our communities. And that sense of disconnection and disengagement, it leads to disease and we stop feeling life. We forget what now feels like. We forget what joy feels like. I can't tell you how many educators, when I do breakout sessions and I'm really focused around their well-being, and I ask, what does the next level of aliveness feel like for you? And they just don't really know how to answer the question. Yeah, no, I never thought of it.
I'm not sure that I would have an answer.
Yeah. And so when we create the conditions where people can feel fully alive,
right,
they're the most collaborative, they're the most contributing, they're the healthiest, they're the happiest. And it's not that hard to do.
And that's what I was going to say. That was my next thing is, do you see patterns in what makes people feel alive?
Yeah, for sure.
What are they?
Really strong collaborations with their team. So feeling like their team has their back, feeling like their team, whether that's grade band team or otherwise, feels like they check in on them and they care about them. And that if they weren't there, they would be missed. So just these little interactions from day to day that let people know that like, you're important to me. Another one that educators say all the time is when they feel listened to and given feedback. So it's not just that they're speaking and they're heard, but that people who are listening to them actually give them feedback. That makes them feel like they are significant, if they matter. That's really low-hanging fruit, right? So those are a couple of patterns that I see, but also when we give educators the opportunity to learn from each other. So I've been called many times to do the last day of school professional development. It's the worst day of the school year. It's due to be done. No one wants to listen to an outside person come in and share. So whenever I'm asked, and especially if it's a school I've been working with, I create a shared learning environment that day where we figure out, who are the teachers, who's anybody in this building or in this district who's doing something that's making a difference, helping people feel like they matter. And we get a whole bunch of names together, and then we say, okay, let's invite them and see if they'd be willing to share how they do what they do. And we just create a rotation of some small, mini sessions. In fact, one time we had a name that kept coming up. It was a front office staff, an administrative assistant. And this person just, they went above and beyond helping people feel like they really mattered, whether it was the parent who walked in and that's the first person that they greet. And so I said, well, why don't we ask? And they said, no. She would never want to do a PD for teachers. Like, I said, well, anybody willing to ask her? I'm like, go call her down here. So they called her down to the room we were in. And they said, listen, your name keeps coming up as someone who really has this way of helping people feel like they matter. Would you be willing to share? And she just cried. She couldn't believe that people saw her in that way. Then to be a contribution brings us alive.
Absolutely.
When we can be a contribution back to people and people that we love, and it's powerful.
That is awesome. And who knows where her mindset was in wondering if what she was doing was contributed in a positive way. So I'm sure that was a game changer for her as well.
100%. Most of the time, the positive disruptors, they don't realize they're doing anything special.
They're just being them.
It's just who they are. Yeah, they're doing what they've always done, and it works, and they're happy that it makes a difference. They don't realize that people are watching or that people even recognize. And so when you give people the opportunity to share that and say your name was brought up, your colleagues think you do this well, right? These faces light up. They come alive again. And that's the consistent thing that I see in the work that I get to do, is that when we create these structures, that's not like top down and kind of outside driven rather than inside developed, people start to feel alive again in schools.
Yeah. We always have to acknowledge the problems, like you mentioned earlier. And unfortunately, I think that we've gotten really good at acknowledging the problems. And it just comes into we're going to acknowledge the problems. We're going to sit and talk about the problems. We're going to focus. We're going to take data on the problems.
That's right.
We're going to form a committee on the problems, analyze. And just by the sheer nature of what you're talking about, that concept of that aliveness, it's almost like we're bringing, I hate to say it this way, but it's almost like we're bringing death into the conversation, into the focus. Like, these are things we're not doing well, and we're going to focus all of our time on it instead of looking at what we're doing well and watching the person that's doing well and replicating what's doing well.
Yeah.
So that's a mind shift.
Yeah,
it really is.
It's a difference of, running from the death of our schools and the system that exists right now and running towards the potential and the life-giving service that school offers.
Wow.
That is the difference. And it's a shift. We look at those problems, we create committees, all the things that you just said. But how often do we go into those meetings and we say, who's doing it well? Who's figured it out?
Yeah. When you said that about the front office staff, I was like, yes, yeah. I don't think I've ever participated in a professional development or even just collaboration where we said, we're going to talk to all the people that are doing this really well.
That's right.
Let's find out what they're doing.
That's right.
I mean, we do kind of do a little version of it when we ask for professional development from specific people. We're like, oh, this teacher is really great at improving reading scores.
Yeah.
They'll do a professional development. So we do it a little bit, but it almost sounds like what you're talking about is much more collaborative as opposed to being taught to.
Oh, 100%. So in the story I shared from Vietnam, when they invited all of the community, whether their children were nourished or malnourished, to come to a dinner with the foods that they discovered were the solutions in that community, shrimp, sweet potato, leaves, and crab, were the key ingredients in the difference between the families whose children were nourished and not nourished. The very people whose behaviors had to change started changing that night when they invited them to the table, bring that food with them. That started discussion. That started sharing and stories and storytelling. And then that led to a community-driven approach to say, well, the answers are right here. How do we replicate and scale what people are doing so more children are nourished and healthy?
Yeah.
2.2 million children have been impacted. They actually call it the grandmother effect now because those practices that were discovered. And so when I do this work in schools, as long as the problem requires behavior change, it's a problem that can use this approach. But once you have the pathway, it doesn't matter what the problem is, you can just rinse and repeat this process.
Yeah.
So you don't need somebody from outside helping you navigate the process. You just say, okay, we've been through this. Now our big problem is reading.
Mm.
Well, let's look. Yeah, our reading scores tank across the district. But in these 3 classrooms, they're skyrocketing.
Yeah.
How do we go in and find that? And then you scale that practice. And you just keep using this to solve problems
I love
in a brand new way.
Yeah. So one of the focuses that I have, and I mentioned it earlier in our conversation, is the amplifying the voices of educators. I feel like, we talk about the science of learning. We talk about the things that we do. We talk about test scores. We talk about all those things. But I want to hear the soul of people, the stories, all of that. Do you have any story that has been impactful to you, that you've seen the change of, that behavior shift, that change and the outcomes? I would love to hear something that you've seen.
Yeah. So many great stories I take away from the schools that I work with, because when they're given that agency and that autonomy to not only discover the solutions, but create the really creative shared learning opportunities, they come up with incredible things. So one district I'm working in right now, they are trying to address mattering and to improve mattering in their school, but by creating pillars for radical love. They started asking, who here radically loves our children? And so we started to go in and watch these classrooms where students were radically loved. Yeah, I just saw some of the most creative ways to engage students in creating a culture of care in the classroom where, if Shania said something, they would say, go Shania, and the whole class would go, cheer on. And then asking for, an answer from the whole class. And this teacher in particular, Miss Glover, she would say, do you need to phone a friend? So if they needed help, this is the reliance on each other, this culture
Building
of
the
care.
community.
Yeah. So those situations I love, finding, these pockets of radical love, teachers who are, creating a sense of joy but rigor. So how they're creating fun and engaging ways for kids to learn content, keeping them, really on the rigor path, but with joy.
Right.
Who's creating joy in classrooms? Let's find them, One particular teacher in that same school, this is a school called Phillips Academy Charter. It's in Newark, New Jersey. And we went in to observe, and this teacher really created the sense that students owned their learning. So they were almost doing a speed dating. They had, materials where they were reading off of, and somebody was the person who was the expert. Somebody was the person asking questions, and they would ask each other questions, and that expert would answer and respond. And then the speed dating was up. They would move to the next person. It was another topic. And it was a way for them to test their learning and learn from each other, because the expert could expand on it. But just incredible ways of having kids learn from each other and be owners of their learning.
Right.
If we're going to change the game in education at this point, we have to abandon the systems that have gotten us this far that aren't working anymore, because kids know it. And the gig is up, right? The reason why we're seeing kids kind of misbehave and the behaviors go through the roof is because the system doesn't work for the kids that we have today in those seats. And what that requires of educators is that we also have to realize that our role has changed. We used to be the holder of all the knowledge. They had to come to us. That's not the way it is right now. Kids can get information anywhere. It's at their fingertips. And so we really have to shift to being these kind of co-journeyers with children. We're on this journey with them, and we're creating experiences where they can kind of develop their own wisdom.
Yeah.
And we have to be kind of co-travelers with them. That's how I am as a therapist. I always feel like I'm a co-traveler with people. And I think for educators, it would really help us to release that sense that we know everything and that we should, and then they need to come to us to know it all, and be co-travelers with them on their journey of learning.
Yeah. So much to think about. To me, when I hear, when I was listening to you speak, I get energized by the idea of being able to change, being able to transform, being able to do the new things. But I do know that there are some that change is terrifying too.
Sure.
Even the adults need a safe place, right?
100%.
We need to be able to explore who we are and what scares us, and maybe watch a colleague that does something really well. I don't know. I think that we could talk forever.
We could. I want to follow up on this one point, though, because it's really important.
Yeah.
In this process of positive disruption, it's not by demand. A lot of things we do, we demand educators to do. And so it's by invitation, and we're always inviting somebody else at the table. So we say, who else needs to be at the table? Who else do we need to talk to? When we, ask to go into classrooms, we'll say, like, is it okay if we come in? Would you be okay with that? And so everything is really about like kind of building capacity from within, just starting small and building capacity. So in one district we started with, I think we had 12 people that were really invested in being the kind of not gatekeepers, but being the stewards of this work and like building capacity from within. By the end of the school year, we had 75 people that said, they wanted to be a part of the work we were doing in some way, in some capacity. Not everybody needs to have every role. But then we asked educators at the end of the year, would you want to participate in opening classrooms so you can go in and observe other colleagues? And would you be willing to open up your classroom? Over 75% of the people said yes, they wanted to do that. Yeah. And then when we asked if you'd like to be a part of our team to spread this widely, we had almost 80% of people in a district say, yeah, they wanted to be a part. So when you talk about engagement, right, the thing that engages people is not by force, but continuing to consistently show up, authentic, transparent, and inviting people to the table. Yeah. And when you do that, engagement soars.
Which makes complete sense because with my background, I work, I really love working with the most challenging behavioral situations that there were in health schools. That's just where my heart and my passion is. Yeah. And one of the reasons I've been so successful is I always wait for buy-in.
Yeah.
I don't have to force a student to do what I want them to do. I wait for buy-in. And of course I do that within parameters to keep kids safe and all that kind of stuff. But once the buy-in's there, the behavior change just follows. Yeah. And so I never really thought about it on a grander scale where we're talking about adults and even larger communities within school settings. But yeah, that buy-in.
And the buy-in is just through relationships.
Yeah.
It's leveraging that relationship with that student that helps them to trust you, to buy in, to participate, to kind of go to their growth edge. And so if we leverage the power of relationships and connection, human connection, and the humanity part of our jobs, then buy-in there's not so much resistance. Right? Buy-in flows when people really feel like you care about them, that they're significant, that they matter here. Have you ever been on a team, right, where like you just, you were in this, you knew you had each other's back, you were with each other on this journey, you feel alive, you feel excited, you'll go the extra mile. You don't really need buy-in.
No, you're right.
Relationships.
Yeah.
The power of relationships.
And there was a time in my career where I worked in an outside placement for kids with extreme behavior challenges. And it was interesting to me. We ran about a staff of 35, but these people showed up every day and we were doing really hard jobs and we would come out injured. I mean, it was not uncommon to be injured by the end of the day. And the connection that we had, we'd get a call for help and we'd go running in. Everybody went running in and it's, 8-10 years later and we're all still closely connected. That's right. There are people that I still know today, even though I don't talk to them every day, that if I called, they'd come running in.
100%.
And the only thing that was different was it was community and we counted on each other. We collaborated with each other and we were a team.
That's right.
And we didn't have to convince us. We were the team.
That's it. That's the answer.
There was nothing special about any of us. We were just all willing to be a part of the team.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, you've given me so much to think about today. And I just feel so fortunate that my company believes in education so much.
Yeah.
And sent me here and gave me the liberty to say, grab anybody you can and let's talk to them because that's where we're going to find the soul and the stories behind what we do. That's just being willing to all of a sudden connect today. That's right. Just say, hey, and then to see how much we align in our connections. I'm fascinated too by connecting with people. So I appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
I'm so glad you came. Yes.
So glad you were in the room.
This was awesome. And we will have to connect again because I still think we have a lot of things that we can say.
You need a part 2.
Yeah. So thank you so much.
Thank you too.
Thanks for listening to Queued Up. Follow and subscribe to stay queued up for what's next.